Delighted one more time we have the opportunity have a discussion, and Professor Clohessy, that we have a discussion with him a few months ago regarding his other book regarding Hazrate Fatima. Today we are going, inshallah, have a discussion about his latest book, which is about Hazrate al-Fadl al-Abbas. So we, in the previous lecture, we have more in the introductory part, we have more discussion about his personal life, upbringing, and many other aspects, which maybe not going through them today, but I really refer to the listeners to that lecture. But this one, I will briefly introduce him. Father Christopher Paul Clohessy is a South African Catholic priest who holds a BSc from the Pontifical Urbanium University in Rome and PhD from the Pontifical Institute for Arabic Islamic Studies, also in Rome. He is at present a resident faculty member of that institute, lecturing there in Shia Islamic Studies, Quranic Studies, Islamic Ethics, and Christian-Muslim Dialogue, and is a visiting lecturer at the Pontifical Beda College in Rome, where he lectures in fundamental theology, ecclesiology, Islam, and Mariology. He's author of few books, including he is author of Fatima, Daughter of Prophet Muhammad, which the first edition was published 2009, a second edition, an expanded edition came in 2018. The second book is Half of My Heart, the narratives of Zaynab bint Ali, which was published in 2018. And the third book was Angels Hastening the Karbala Dreams 2021. And this last book is the Outrider, al-Fadl Abbas. We came out at 2024. I think all by Gorgias Press or publication. Yeah, all published by Gorgias Press. In 2021, he was one of the recipients of the Iranian World Book Award with the nomination of a distinguished researcher. So without further ado, I give the podium to Professor Clohessy, and then we will go to discussion and kind of talk together after his introductory remarks. Thank you.
Good, thank you for your, as always, your very kind welcome and your kind introduction. When we last spoke, this book was still being written. I was still working on it. And I have to say, I wrote a book on al-Fadl with great reluctance. Firstly, because I know that he is greatly revered in the Shia Islamic world, that he is held in high esteem. In fact, last year when I was in Tehran and Qum, I was warned by scholars there to write carefully about al-Abbas because of the great devotion that people have for him. And in particular, I was a little uncomfortable at the beginning writing about this aspect of his life for which he is best remembered, and that is the question of his fetching water in, around, or on the day of Karbala. And also, of course, because unlike Lady Fatima and to a lesser extent Lady Zaynab, the primary Arabic sources for al-Fadl are very few. I think there's only one main strand of hadith. It comes from Imam Sajjad via Ibn Babawayh about the status that al-Fadl has now a status in heaven that even the martyrs are going to be envious on the day of resurrection. But aside that, unlike Lady Fatima and al-Husayn and the others, there is nothing else in the hadith texts, and therefore I had to rely on the history books. So all of the great moments of al-Abbas's life, the moments we know best, those moments that are persistently told and retold in the majalis setting or in the ta'ziyah setting, all of those moments are the moments that I've tried to deal with in this book, as well as something of his personality, because he is an iconic figure. In fact, I would say that, like al-Husayn, he is close to being an archetypal figure. And I thought, as a Christian theologian, that his story was worth telling, firstly, because I think he merits a biography of his own, but secondly, because I thought because of this, because he is iconic, because of who I think he is, his story is worth telling to a much wider audience, Shia Muslims who perhaps know little about him, although they have great devotion to him, but also non-Muslims and non-Shia Muslims and non-Muslims as well. Almost, it seems to me that it is it became increasingly difficult for me to tell the story of al-Husayn without telling the story of al-Abbas, because they lived, as I said in the book, they lived in the sort of virtuous circle, nourishing each other's, nurturing each other's life and each other's story. Al-Abbas ends up being the champion of his brother. He's his standard bearer. He is his top soldier, his diplomat. He's the one who's entrusted with the most dangerous missions, which is the reason for the name Outrider, one who is constantly being sent out far from the crowd to do dangerous things. For this reason, some texts, very few, but some texts record the words of al-Husayn at the death of al-Abbas, "My back is now broken." It is almost as though everything has come to an end for al-Husayn when he sees the body of his half-brother who has been killed. So at the outset, I found the sort of parameters, if you like, of al-Abbas's story, and I call him Abbas much more than I call him al-Fadl, because al-Abbas is the name given him by his father for a particular reason, and it has particular significance in his life. The parameters of his story are really at the beginning quite simple. We know that he has 3 blood brothers. These 4 brothers are all sons of Ali bin Abi Talib, not by Lady Fatima, but by another Fatima, who eventually would become known more popularly as al-Banin. We are told by the text to avoid reminding Ali of his first beloved wife, Lady Fatima. So he doesn't share in the immediate status of his half-brother al-Husayn as Imam, but he certainly grows up in that milieu and in that household. I began the book by using 2 basic transmitters. I took Abu Makhnaf. Now, we'll come back to Abu Makhnaf because he's an extremely problematic source and character, but he is, for me, a crucial source for Karbala because it really is the earliest maqtal that we can find, even if we've only got fragments of the original work. And then side by side with Abu Makhnaf, I took, obviously, Sheikh al-Mufid, because Sheikh Mufid, although these 2 are separated by at least 2.5 centuries, Sheikh Mufid, in his Kitab al-Irshad, he gives us a very nice outline of the events of Karbala and al-Abbas's activities during those events. And then, of course, there are a number of events that are told only by later transmitters. They are skipped by al-Mufid, and they come back in later transmitters. We'll look at that in a moment. The trouble with Abu Makhnaf is he needs some very cautious introduction. So my personal academic opinion is that Abu Makhnaf was a Shia, or at least what you could call a proto-Shia. That is, he was a great supporter of the cause of Ali. My friends in Tehran insisted that he was not a Shia. I think he was a Shia, and that therefore his maqtal is of increasing importance because it is his maqtal that is used by all the early Sunni historians like Tabari and Baladhuri, to a less extent Ibn Sa'd. And therefore, the fragments of the earliest account we have of al-Husayn and al-Abbas, they are now kept for us by Sunni historians, but they had originally a Shi'i source. And so I began by trying to discover what Abu Makhnaf said about al-Abbas and his attempt to fetch water. So aside from biographical details, the biographical details can be established with great simplicity, but without much detail, because as with al-Husayn himself even, we don't have that much information about the early years. We have certainly hadith that speak of the Prophet Muhammad and his 2 beloved grandsons, al-Hassan and al-Husayn. But in terms of a day-to-day account of the early years, the historians did not give us that information. As with al-Abbas, besides the fact that we know who his parents are, for the rest, we have to rely on all kinds of secondary and tertiary sources, not on primary sources. And therefore, this book gives a brief introduction to his life, his birth, an introduction to his mother, who I think is of crucial importance in that she is the one who gives him a certain Islamic formation in piety and in law and what it means to be submitted to God. I think that she merits her own biography. Perhaps one day we will get round to this. And then comes the Karbala event and the immediate events leading up to that. So the first thing that strikes me about the writings of Abu Makhnaf concerning al-Abbas is that according to Abu Makhnaf, al-Abbas went to fetch water before the battle, not during the battle. Possibly on the 8th of Muharram, more likely, I think, on the 9th of Muharram, he gets sent by his brother with a group in which he is clearly not the standard bearer or the leader. It is somebody else, Nafi, who is the standard bearer. There is a scuffle at the water's edge, and the group, among whom is al-Abbas, bring back water successfully without losing a single man, successfully to al-Husayn's camp. So if we're going to rely on Abu Makhnaf as the earliest source, it seems to me that the fetching of water certainly, or a fetching of water, certainly happened before the actual battle. It is only later on, with later fourth Islamic century scholars, that we begin to read a new story or a new idea, and that is that it was at the height of battle, in fact, more towards the end of battle, that al-Abbas goes to fetch water, and he is not successful. He gets killed, coming back with the water. And then that second strand becomes more interesting because as the years go by, the sources add further elements, such as al-Abbas's refusal to drink water and quench his own thirst before the thirst of al-Husayn and the women folk were quenched. Now, the book goes into this whole question in detail because he is, after all, known as as-Saqa, the water bearer, as almost his primary nickname, one of his primary nicknames. So the fetching of water is absolutely foundational to the life of al-Abbas, and it gives a certain shape and a certain texture to his character. We'll talk in a moment about his character. My own opinion is that if it is true that somewhere between the 3rd and the 7th of Muharram, the water was cut off. Many texts say around about the 3rd, but it could have been slightly later. I don't believe that there would have only been one attempt to fetch water on the day of Karbala by al-Abbas. I think there would have been a number of attempts. And I think al-Abbas was probably involved in more than one attempt and was killed finally in one of those attempts. Therefore, I believe the account given by Abu Makhnaf. I believe that he went to fetch water as a group, a member of a group in which he was not the leader, or at least he was not the standard bearer. He was given the command, but somebody else carried the standard. They did fight a scuffle and they did bring water back. And I believe that towards the end of the battle, when no one else was left, both he and al-Husayn tried to fight their way towards water and were both killed eventually. Quite possibly the story of al-Abbas bringing back the water and being killed and then dismembered after his death, that fits in somewhere there. So it is for this reason that I wrote this book very carefully, because I didn't want to provoke offense, but I was quite interested in how the story from the first Shi'i text that I could find, which was Makhnaf, as it's recounted in Baladri and Tabari, how it changes as you get to al-Qadi later on, and some of the 4th century, I think 4th century writers who tell a very different account of how the water was fetched. In terms of al-Mufid, and I like reading Sheikh Mufid because he gives very good historical details and outlines. I followed him in a sense because he gives us a number of moments about the life of al-Abbas that we don't always find everywhere else. So he mentions who al-Abbas is, the oldest of 3 brothers, all born of Ali bin Abi Talib and al-Banin. Abdullah, Uthman, and Jafar, the other 3 brothers. We're not always sure which order they're in, but they're all of them martyrs, and all of them get easily forgotten because they are overshadowed by al-Abbas in the same way that, in a sense, al-Abbas is overshadowed by al-Husayn. But nonetheless, al-Mufid, Sheikh Mufid, establishes these biographical details for us. Secondly, Al-Mufid recounts that around the 9th of Muharram, so I think the night of the 9th of Muharram was a frantic night. There were all kinds of things that are reported to have happened on that night. According to Sheikh Mufid, just before hostilities began the next morning, Shimr, the dreadful commander of Ibn Ziyad's forces, he tries to offer indemnity to al-Abbas and his three brothers, not to al-Husayn. But in fact, there is a double indemnity because Shimr, for better or for worse, who is related to al-Banin, he is trying to rescue these four relations. But Ibn Ziyad also sends an offer of amnesty, quite possibly brought by Shimr, so that there's a double offer made to the four brothers, quite definitely without al-Husayn being part of them. And al-Abbas, the silent al-Abbas who rarely ever speaks, is the spokesman refusing this rejection. On that same night, al-Mufid's third point, al-Husayn instructs al-Abbas to ride out and to meet the enemy. So remember, it's possibly on the same night, according to Makhnaf, that he was also sent to fetch water. Nonetheless, al-Husayn instructs al-Abbas to ride out to meet the enemy who are now moving, to find out what the situation is, what exactly do they want. And it seems to revolve around a highly disputed question of an offer that was made to al-Husayn and whether al-Husayn was going to take this offer. And in some texts, mostly the Sunni historians, that al-Husayn himself offered to disappear, that he would leave and bring the situation to an end. But now the army is beginning to move. Al-Husayn needs to know what's going on. So he sends his most trustworthy half-brother, al-Abbas, to find out. And there's in Tabari, a marvelous conversation that goes on at the river's edge. Some of the men with Abbas challenge the soldiers of Ziyad's army and tell them how foolish they are. Al-Abbas is sent back to al-Husayn with the answer from the soldiers, which is, you have to submit or we're going to kill you all. And then Abbas is sent a second time on that same night to the same army group to ask for time. It's another very interesting moment because al-Husayn says to al-Abbas, ask them for time that we may recite Quran. It's not what al-Abbas asks for. Al-Abbas, the diplomat, asks for time so that they might consider the enemy's offer, as if he knew that Quranic recitation would not figure very highly on the list of priorities of the enemy, but negotiation would. And so he doesn't mention what al-Husayn had sent him to ask for. He, as a true diplomat, creates a way of gaining time. And he certainly does gain time. For me, it's proof of some of his diplomatic skill. Then, still on the night of the 9th of Muharram, we are told that al-Husayn offers to release his followers from their oaths. And once again, al-Abbas is the first to speak and say, we would do no such thing. Al-Abbas is very much a silent character. He rarely ever speaks. In fact, he hides behind al-Husayn. You don't often see Abbas because he will not draw attention to himself. But on at least two occasions, he is the first to speak, and he speaks on behalf of his brothers, or he speaks on behalf of a much larger group. It is also just after this, probably early hours of the morning of the 10th, the day of Ashura, according to Sheikh al-Mufid, that al-Husayn gives his standard to al-Abbas. So al-Abbas, above everything else, is now also the standard bearer. The standard of Ibn Ziyad's army is given to a non-entity whose name will never be remembered, but al-Husayn gives his standard to his brother, and that standard is kept high until the end of the battle, when finally al-Abbas falls. And then number 6, the sixth point that in the chronology given by Sheikh al-Mufid is that towards the end of the battle, when al-Abbas sees that everyone else has been killed, he then invites his 3 brothers to go forward in front of al-Husayn and to be martyred. The texts differ from author to author. In some cases, at least one case, he asks his brothers to go and surround al-Husayn and be bodyguards for him and die doing that. In other texts, they go out one by one and give their lives for him. He becomes their heir and then he dies. So in al-Sheikh al-Mufid, there is no going to fetch water the day before the battle, the way that we see it in the early, on the 9th in the earlier texts. This is where Sheikh Mufid then becomes a little vague, less detailed. He says that al-Husayn at this point is suffering from severe thirst. Mostly everyone is dead now. And so he attempts to get to a water source himself with Abbas in front of him. Their access is blocked by Umar bin Sa'ad's horsemen. And so al-Mushfid, Sheikh al-Mufid, who is writing 300 years after Tabari, has written a significantly different account than Tabari did, basing himself on the earliest Shia account, which is Abi Makhnaf. And now at this point, al-Abbas appears to be surrounded, according to Sheikh Mufid. He does not get killed bringing water back. He gets killed fighting off an attack on al-Husayn. And we are given the names of those who killed him. And he is buried, says Sheikh Mufid, in the very place where he fell on this road to Ghadiriya. And that's where his tomb is today. There is one other attempt, or at least one other job that Sheikh Mufid gives to al-Abbas, and that is that he sends him to rescue some of his own soldiers. Al-Husayn, some of his own soldiers plunge too deeply into the battle and they get surrounded, and al-Abbas is sent to rescue them and bring them out. So in essence, what I've tried to do, because it's the only way I could do this, is to begin with the earliest sources and move from there. Now, in Western scholarship, the issue of Islamic sources is a big problematic issue because there's all kinds of questions and distrust about the sources. My own point, as a far less brilliant academic than many of my colleagues, is that I simply start with the earliest report I can find, and I trace the report from there because I'm interested to see how the report is manipulated, or if it changes, or if it stays the same. So having started with Abu Makhnaf, as he is found in Tabari and Baladhuri and Ibn Sa'd, I then began to look at later Shi'i sources who tell a slightly different story about how water is fetched and the glorious martyrdom of al-Abbas as he fetches water. I think that on a kind of from a spiritual point of view, as a theologian, I think that al-Abbas, for everything else you can say about him, he is an antidote to the egoism of the world. So we're living in a time now when ego reigns supreme. People want what they want, when they want it, how they want it. They don't want any physical pain. They want medical science to take all pain and suffering away. And there you have al-Abbas, who I think had a double martyrdom. I think that he gave his life fi sabilillah, as did al-Husayn. He gave his life by attaching himself intimately to the cause of al-Husayn because he believed in that cause. And so from a general point of view, that was the reason for his death. But the immediate cause of his death was because he went to fetch water for some women and some children. So this very tough diplomat, soldier, negotiator, he goes off to fetch water because he hears the cries of the children, especially Sukaina or Sakina, whichever name you choose to use. And he gives his life for these women and children. So it's a double martyrdom. He gives his life for God, but indirectly he does it by giving his life for his brother and also for these women and children. Therefore, he is an anti-value for the modern world. He is precisely what nobody does anymore. He is the value of al-Abbas is that he stands against egoism. He is sheer altruism, someone who's willing to sacrifice their rights and everything they have for the good of someone else, not just for some other world leader, but even for a group of women and children, because he's desperate to see their thirst quenched. And this is the great joy that I had in writing this book about him, because obviously, as a theologian, a Christian theologian, I know very well the story of martyrdom in Christianity, and I know the story of martyrdom in Islam. Both Islam and Christianity have produced some extraordinary martyrs. Many of them we hardly mention anymore. We remember them briefly and they disappear. But al-Abbas is a perennial figure. He keeps returning year after year in the majalis and in the ta'ziyah and on the days of Muharram when his story is retold. And he keeps returning because he is an unlikely hero. This great tough soldier, we're told in the early text that he's so tall that he can't even ride a horse without his feet dragging on the ground. And yet he gives his life for a group of women and children. I think, as a Christian theologian, I think that he is a wonderful contemporary example for the world and an icon and a model. And that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. So the book has an introduction and then a first chapter which tells about his early life as much as I can reconstruct, and quite a lot about al-Banin and also his three brothers, because they deserve a mention. And then we go on to the great events of Karbala and questioning some of the texts. So Abbas has been my companion now for 3 years, or 4 years, my companion. It was here in London that somebody, a friend, a Muslim friend, first suggested, when I was looking for a new topic, first suggested, why not tackle al-Abbas? Because there's hardly anything written about him despite the devotion to him. And it's been 3 or 4 quite tough years trying to put it all together and read endless texts, especially firstly the early ones, then the later ones. All of the disputed questions that I had to face. For example, did he really fight at Siffayn? I have my doubts personally whether he did. I think he may have been present at Siffayn, but whether he swapped his clothing for the clothing of his father and pretended to be Ali on the field, I'm not so sure if that wasn't another al-Abbas who was present. The question of his mother, was she alive during Karbala? I thought she was. There's at least one contemporary Maqtal, Abdul Razak, who insists she wasn't. He says she was quite clearly dead, and that the story of her going to the graveyard to weep over al-Husayn and al-Abbas, and that Ibn Marwan, the governor, used to come and weep at the graveyard listening to her, that story is simply not true. And yet it's found its way into at least one very, very major early Islamic text. And so there have been a number of, unlike the life of Lady Zaynab in a sense, which was, and Lady Zaynab and Lady Fatima, this has been quite a tough work because of these disputed questions and because, I'm primarily an historian. But I also don't want to offend people. I really don't. I think that people hold their Christianity and their Islam close to their hearts, and that these characters who we've grown up with are very important to us. And I'm not going to go out and attempt to turn upside down all the stories. So I've tried to be faithful and simply allow al-Abbas to speak for himself, which he does through the text, starting with the earliest and then moving right through to finally to, of course, al-Majlisi, who is a great collector of hadith. Some of them, no idea where he got them from. They're just there and one has to deal with them. But this is what I've tried to do. And it's my academic method is quite simplistic. I just work from the earliest texts till there are no more, and then attempt to put the life together. So that's al-Abbas. That's about all I can say. Perhaps there are some questions that come up, and I hope people will read the book. It's a much shorter book than my normal books because really it's difficult to find much to say, but I've enjoyed writing about him. I'm deeply inspired by him. He's been a great companion in these years, and not for his courage. It's not courage that was the thing that I was looking for, but for his altruism. The fact that you would be willing to give up so much for what appears to be such a tiny cause, a group of thirsty children, that you would be willing to lay down your life for that, for me, is an extraordinary thing. And we, being people of little faith, we never thought we would see these things repeated in our days, but perhaps they are. Perhaps there still are people laying down their lives for what we would regard as small causes, but which are really causes that are close to God. So I hope people enjoy the book when they finally get their hands on it.
Well, thank you so much. It was just wonderful. It was just wonderful to have you and to talk about this book. If you have any question, you can either put it in the chat. Dr. Clohessy will take care of it and discuss it. Or if you want to raise or discuss your question yourself, Just raise your hand and then we ask you to unmute and you can have your question. Dr. Clohessy, please, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Musalleh. Professor Dr. Clohessy, I'm very, thank you for your speech. You summarized it and touched some of the important part of the books, or you can say somewhat controversial from the beginning. Actually, if you spend with al-Fadl Abbas the last 3-4 years, the last few days I spent with your book, actually I was in Iran flying back, and then we kind of arranged this talk, and I said I was reading the airplane and last night, and I'm very pleased with the book because I think you did. I will go through some of it. There are some questions, but I think the next half an hour, I first want to keep it around your book, and then we go to the questions, maybe the last third half an hour. Because especially the chapter 4, which is about water bringing of Hazrate Abbas and other chapters, you touch some topics. You did great service to the Shia Islam because many Shia writers, maybe they do not dare go over there, or especially putting it aside, you use a very critical, historical, scientific method, but very respectful and objective. And because I was reading that chapter, I was really interesting for me. And as you said, the methodology is very clear, starting from earliest sources and listing them through and going through and discussing that. Let me first share the chapters of the book because to see people which haven't seen it. Look, this is the book table of contents. Okay, let's make it smaller to fit in. Okay. So look, it is chapter 1 is introduction, which is methodology explained, the mother and her son. This is the part about al-Baneen. Every chapter is a very thorough discussion, and all different versions it's said. For example, the example Professor Clohessy gave, whether al-Baneen was alive when his 4 sons martyred in Karbala or not. Most Shia studies believe she was, because they all believe, most of us believe or heard that she saw. She knew that her sons are martyred because some blood appeared in something, sand container she had. The field of the Karbala is, as Professor Clohessy said, is the discussion of the activity of al-Fadl Abbas in the Karbala based on the mostly Irshad Sheikh al-Mufid. And this water bearer is, as again Professor Clohessy said, start with Abi Makhnaf and all the resources. Actually, in this chapter 4, we have a good section about history, or good part historiography of the whole event of Karbala, which I think this book it was a little bit different from the other books, especially the Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, which are more familiar, because there was more hadith. You may be avoiding, although you have still source criticism, but here again you didn't criticize, but because more we are dealing with the history, you listed all different versions, contrasted them, and kind of you'll be explicit about your opinion. And let me put it aside. I'm completely, let me go my personal experience. Actually, I touched myself one time this issue of water bringing. And I was in the reaction of one of the criticism of modern intellectual, secular, or so-called religious intellectuals in Iran, which they start even doubting the existence of the character of al-Fadl Abbas. I did some research, and I was referring some discrepancy in historical sources. So when I went to go to the research, I was relying mostly Akhbar al-Tabal, Ibn Qutayba, which you mentioned it, but that book is very summarized. And then I looked to the Abi Makhnaf reconstructed version, Farsi translation, that they went to different history books. Everywhere Tabari says, I get this, maybe Abi Makhnaf, they snap it out, and they reconstructed his book by Atullah Yusufi Qaravi. And I rely on them. And in the middle of a talk, I mentioned, okay, maybe the story is different. And then that brought sensitivity. That 1 minute, 2 minutes, which I mentioned, it occupied all the questions. But your investigation is much more thorough, and kind of, although at the end, you have an interesting conclusion based on Abdul Razak Maqtal, which kind of combine both narrations. But I personally have been inclined to Abi Makhnaf. One thing I would say, maybe start it here, and then I want you to go discuss it, because there are many points you mentioned. Maybe I mentioned two, and I want to discuss it, and I want maybe ask you to give also a little bit introduction to historiography of event of Karbala. You listed all those books, explained them, how the relationship is. Okay, I agree with you. Abi Makhnaf is Shi'i, at least political Shi'i. You know, because we have Shi'atul Ali in the sense of the political supporters of Imam Ali in opposition Shia to Usman, and the religious Shi'i, which is now is the Shi'ism. And I agree, yes, his family and his all relationship shows that he most probably was also a religious Shi'i too. But I really, objectively, personally, I don't think he's biased because he's expert in events in Iraq. And much of what we know events of Iraq is because he's writing, because he was in Iraq. As you know better, that historiography at that time was regional. Some people expert in even Hijaz, some people expert in events on more in Syria and so on, because they know people living over there, they know people doing activity over there. So Abi Makhnaf, I think even as a modern historian, we read his versions, seems more rational, less miraculous. I mean, I'm not saying having miracle per se is wrong, but too much of it brings some question. Maybe he doesn't have much those process of mythologization or changing the history to mythology a little bit, which I think this is the main obstacle nowadays, that the story of Karbala is understood by non-Shi'i Muslims and non-Muslims. Look, I just say, I said it before, there was one Sunni Wahhabi, influencer in social media, which was used to come and mock Shias, say things against them, and then one day comes and said, "Okay, I'm going to tell you the true story of Karbala. So don't listen to this what Shias say. These are fancies. I wrote a book." And then I ordered the book, and he came, and I noticed, okay, he did go, because he has more hadith or mine. He copied some hadiths from Bukhari and some known Sunni sources and paste them a little from Tabari, and he gave me a disjuncted history. So it wasn't much anything over there, no much research, just copy pasting some hadith. But at the end of that book, there was a table, which I'm as a Shi'i, I think your book has done the service, touch the sensitive issue, repeating things which are doesn't open question, doesn't address some concerns, doesn't help. And I think you did great service. And when I was reading your book last night, especially this chapter 4, I always really praying you were courageous enough to go to this field, this domain, and very respectful. You know, this guy make a table and then listed the number of the martyrs of Karbala, like Hor, or like I'm not sure about Hazrate Abbas was in the table, some Zuhair ibn Qayn, some other famous Sahabi in Karbala, and then in different Maqtas, different history books, the original Abi Makhnaf, the secondary Abi Makhnaf, which ascribed, the pseudo Abi Makhnaf ascribed to Abi Makhnaf, the one with maybe I don't know, Lohof or another scholar, and then compare how many of the army of Yazid was killed by these martyrs. And then occasionally in the first Abu Makhnaf is 1 or none. Then you see the numbers increasing. For example, from Hor goes from 1 to 1880. So in the first Maktal, Hor is martyring 1, the next one 18, the next one 180. Which 180 is impossible. I mean, you have to go to different metaphysical world, which happened in the last 3 centuries in Iran. We have a trend which is very powerful. The famous clergy or preacher Mullah Ali Awad Darbandi, he was very smart, philosophy too, but he believed the army of Yazid with 3 million people. The day of Ashura was 72 hours. The temperature was very high. This mythology mixed with history. The mythologization of Karbala, which is real history, has made that, unfortunately, the beauties of it is not. or the real meaning and message of it is misunderstood. So I want you to talk. So one thing, just I want to say two things regarding. I want if you can explain a little bit historiography of the Karbala, and then say how much is authentic, how much is not. I personally trust Abi Makhnaf more. And I think he did good job in other parts, not only necessarily about Karbala, all other events. He was a respected scholar, and then okay, maybe Shi'i, but I don't think per se like either you're Shi'i or Sunni or something. So I mean, this way, I don't think that Shi'iness has come in it to be not fair and objective to write in it. That's the parts I want to explain. I come to the other part. And then one other thing about Siffayn, you are right. I was also believing al-Fadl Abbas had fought in Siffayn. You give good numbers. Just ask you, is it possible we take, look, if he's 14 years, right, the numbers now people give, making young to be Siffayn, 10, 11 years old. But we have king of Iran, like Ismail was captured a kingdom when he's 14 years old. So Jeanne d'Arc, you know, or other ones, oh, okay, she was female. But the point is this, maybe it's a different story. 14, 15 makes sense. Could it be al-Fadl Abbas, maybe age at the time of martyrdom was more than 35, for example, was 38, 39, that make it possible be he present in Siffayn. So I have many questions, and I just open it. I want you to discuss. Then I will come back to it because I want to talk too long about monologue. So I'm sorry about this introduction, but because I want to be focused on your book, which is very interesting. Thank you very much. I stopped the sharing.
Thank you. So let's begin with the question of Siffayn. So in theory, al-Abbas, if we go by the traditional dates, would have been maybe 12, 13, somewhere around there. And therefore, I'm convinced he was present at the battle. But there are texts in which Ali forbids his sons to fight, his younger sons. So I found these texts, and I mentioned them, that there are texts in which he quite clearly forbade his sons to fight. And furthermore, there are texts which talk about the assassination, the murder of Ali bin Abi Talib, the group who go out to avenge his death. Al-Abbas is not allowed to be part of that group because we are told he's too young to be part of this group that goes out. I think I found that even in Ibn Sa'd, that when this group gathered so sons of Ali to go out and get revenge, al-Abbas was not part of that group because he was not yet regarded as mature or as an adult. So this is after Siffayn. There's a good argument, and I think I put in the book, for the al-Abbas at Siffayn, an older boy who did indeed take the place of Ali and go out and draw the enemy out. But whether that was al-Abbas himself, and there is a sense for me, and again I tread very carefully, there is a sense for me that you have in the Siffayn story, and I don't find him mentioned in any of the primary sources at Siffayn. I didn't find a single primary Arabic source that actually said he was there. But this idea of him going out as a 13-year-old and slaughtering the enemy is exactly the same problem we have with this picture of al-Abbas fighting his way back. He's got the standard in one hand, the sword in another hand, the reins of the horse in his mouth, the water flask dragged over him, and fights his way back through 800, 900, 1,000 soldiers, and kills so many of them. It is a big problem historically. And it doesn't take away, firstly, from his bravery and his courage, and I think he was a great soldier. But when we begin to increase these numbers, as they do with the numbers of Ibn Ziyad's army, after a while, the historicity of the battle begins to lose its import. Now, I faced this problem already when I wrote about Lady Fatima, because there has been this argument about whether we should demythologize Lady Fatima. If we want her to be a model if we want her to be what Ali Shariati says she should be, the woman that all Muslim women want to be, then you have to demythologize her, because the stories surrounding her, the supernatural elements surrounding her, separate her from all other women. as with Mary in the Catholic faith, and make her impossible to be a model. I couldn't possibly come close to her. And then others who said, well, if you remove the supernatural element, you do her a disservice because she is a very important figure in early Islam, chosen by God to play a particular role. So we have to find a balance that without diminishing the quality of isma, for example, in al-Husayn, or the fact that she is ma'suma, at the same time to try and highlight the historical narratives, that these were also human beings. There's no question of divinity. Lady Fatima was a human being, the last surviving daughter of the Prophet, especially blessed by God and chosen by God and given many gifts, but nonetheless, she was also a wife and a mother. And a widow eventually, a suffering, well, not a widow, but one day she would, from the barzakh or wherever she is present, she would see her husband killed. The same applies to al-Abbas. So because the sources are so few, historical sources, there has been a figure built up of this great hero. And basically the story that is recounted in the Majalis is the story of him coming back with water. That's the story. The other issues of Karbala are less recounted than him fighting his way back, being killed, having his limbs cut off, although some texts suggest that happened after he was killed, as a mockery of Islam, because the one thing you don't do in Islam is you don't disfigure a body, and therefore Ibn Ziyad's army deliberately, because they did not practice Islamic principles, disfigured his body after he was dead. But however you tell the story, you reach a moment where there's a physical impossibility that he could have been carrying water and a sword and the standard and holding onto his horse and reciting great poetry as he went. It's a beautiful story, and we don't want to lose it. I think it has a spiritual significance. But I write as an historian, and I'm interested in the facts. And I agree with Abdurrazzaq, not in everything. I think he's wrong about al-Banin. I think she was alive at the end, and that she did go with al-Fadl, really, the son of al-Abbas. She did go to the cemetery and weep. I don't doubt that for a moment. But I do agree with him that probably more than once, al-Abbas went either alone or with a group to fetch water, because they would have needed water from day 3 at least, if not day 7. And you can't imagine that they only went once. Now, we're dealing with very early history. I don't expect that the historians write every detail for us. We have to reconstruct some of it ourselves based on common logic, common good sense. My sense tells me that al-Abbas, on the night of the 9th of Muharram, was involved in a whole lot of very important movements, including the fetching of water successfully. And I think that he died just before al-Husayn, towards the end of the Battle of Karbala, as both of them tried to reach water. That doesn't in any way deny that he was trying to reach water on behalf of the women and children. I think he probably was, because the women and children were still in their tents. But he was together with al-Husayn, and he dies, and then that marks for al-Husayn the end. I call Abu Makhnaf a proto-Shia. And it's a phrase that I stole from Wilfred Madelung, who is a superb author. And he talks about proto-Shia. And I use it in the sense exactly as you've used it, that he was a political Shia, long before a whole lot of other issues, because it's only much later, towards, let's say, with the writing of Imam Baqir, but more especially with his son Ja'far Sadiq, that you have the principles of Shi'i theology and spirituality in place. And you can really talk about the Ithna Ashari. But I think that group around Ali and then immediately after Ali, they are what Madlung regards as the proto-Shia. And for many of them, it was less a religious affinity and more, as you say, a political affinity. I also agree with you that Abu Makhnaf was not biased. Why? Because one of the things that I regard as crucially important about him is the number of eyewitness accounts he uses. So I discovered this when I was writing about Lady Zaynab. Little things that people notice. So I was here at a book launch for this book, now at a Shia community, and somebody said, well, is it really true, logically, that he was such a tall man that his feet dragged on the ground? And I thought, why would you mention it if it wasn't true. If you want to describe a brave soldier, that's not the best way of describing him, that his feet dragged on the ground. But if that was an eyewitness account that people saw him, and I mentioned in the book, he had a distant relative. So al-Banin's relatives stretched deep into the Jahiliyyah. They were all horsemen and soldiers, and there was one of them who we are told also dragged his feet on the ground because he was so tall. And I thought, that sounds to me like a description that is absolutely true. The same as the description of Lady Zaynab's earrings, which flashed in the sun on the field of Karbala, or that her face looked like the sun as she came out onto the battlefield. These, for me, are eyewitness accounts because they are little details that ordinarily would go past, but they've been put into the text because they were seen and remembered. And that's why I trust Abu Makhnaf, and certainly for my book on the Karbala dreams, certainly for this book, I used him as my first source, followed immediately by Tabari, because Tabari basically takes his information from Abu Makhnaf. We know this. And therefore, you have in a Sunni scholar the best details that we can find, the earliest details we can find of Karbala, including the life of al-Abbas. So you know, it is a very difficult path, because I am a Catholic. So Catholicism, the whole of Catholicism, is a marvelous mixture of historical detail and all kinds of spiritual details that have been built along the way. And those details, if you take them away, the whole building begins to collapse, because you're removing an important part of the scaffolding. I think that secular and sacred history run along parallel lines. And for us as historians to simply disregard sacred history and only swear by secular history, that's not true history for me, because as you, so do I believe in God, and I believe that God is involved in our history, and that the history of the divine, how God works among people, that runs parallel with our secular history, easily ignored, but when you begin to see it, hard to miss. And so I try to find a middle balance between the highly mythologized stories and the bare facts, which can be quite dull by themselves. And I think that the al-Abbas, who I discovered, is a marvelous blend between those two. If it turns out that he wasn't as tall as we thought, you know, it's not going to be the end of the world for anyone. It's a good detail. I also think that the ta'ziyah and the majalis are important, even if they're embellished, because they are not historical performances, they are spiritual performances. They're a little, I think the recently deceased scholar talked about a little twist of spirituality mixed with history. And therefore, I don't expect when I go to a majlis for it just to be a recitation of bare historic facts. I expect it to be a narration of a human moment in which, if you like, heaven and earth came together and almost touched in a single person or in a group of people. So I try to follow this path. Sometimes I succeed, quite often I fail, but it's hard not to be impressed by al-Abbas and to acknowledge these things about him.
Thank you. You know, this is exactly the viewpoint you have, was very helpful. But as an outsider, you could look, sometimes it's hard for us to get out of outside tradition, but you know the secular technique of modern history, but also you're not secular. And you're from Catholic. I think this part is important, that, as you said, a good blend of metaphysical, supernatural, and real. And I think this book has a service. You know, I myself, as a believer, I was raised by all this stuff. But then I said, Abi Makhnaf has all the elements. You know, even you go to version Abi Makhnaf, maybe people want to read Professor Clohessy book. Look, it has the bravery, it has the fighting, it has bringing the water, it has all the commandership in a more typical style. Although, you know, the one I was very new for me, which I didn't see in Akhbar al-Tawal, that role of Nafi ibn Hilal, which was very interesting. So, and then I said maybe this process of, because in majalis, like even movie, you need 2-3 characters. I mean, I'm sorry, this is the rational mind that says, okay, maybe people reduce and conflate different stories in one person to be more attractive. Maybe this is the case, but actually, okay, this is a secular mind. But I think the one you said at the end about the way right, you're right. If we have the idea of the 2-3 times, maybe they try 2 times at least, 7th day of Muharram and the 9th or 10th of the day, want to bring the water, everything can be settled. And also the point you mentioned, which maybe the cutting of the hands happen after that, because they cut the head, you know. So I don't want to go too much through this, because I want to ask questions now. We reach the 3rd time, but I really recommend the readers read the book. It is, look, it is a detailed historical one, and then, but I think it's the benefit that you see different, Professor Clohessy has listed all different varieties. Because for myself, I went to Akhbar al-Tawal, but when I read different versions, I notice I need what Akhbar al-Tawal have done. He had simplified it too. You know what I mean? It's the Persian,
sorry to interrupt you. So you said, so you said in the book, different sources or different narrations have been discussed? Is that?
Yes, all of them, all of them. Professor Close, maybe can explain. Honestly, every different variety of era, not the recent years, like Rosat al-Shahada, stuff like that. The historical, classic historical sources.
So it's like in collections of the main.
Not. I should say, Dr. Professor Clohessy said, but the point is this: no, it's not just a listing. It's not listing. It is a very smooth discussion, listed and compared and proceed forward. Okay. So I let Professor Clohessy, maybe can you explain a little bit on methodology? For example, this chapter 4, how you started from earliest sources and going forward through the end.
Yeah, so I don't follow the Western argument over Islamic sources. There's a huge debate. Islamic sources are just rejected out of hand, and I say, well, we as Christians are losing even earlier sources, and everyone's happy. You know, St. Bede wrote a history of the church in England. We're all happy to read St. Bede, but then as soon as we start hitting Islamic sources, we question. No, I think the Islamic sources, and I made the point in the book that what you are reading there is history as it's written through the eyes of a number of eyewitnesses. And therefore I'm happy to accept it. I read the sources carefully, of course. So I began with Abu Makhnaf because I think Abu Makhnaf is the earliest, in fragments, the earliest we have telling the story of the fetching of water. And then I traced how the story changes as more and more Shi'i scholars take it up. And it changes from 9th of Muharram to 10th of Muharram, from before the battle to the end of the battle, from a successful bringing of water to a failed bringing of water because al-Abbas is martyred. I'm fascinated by these developments of texts because the story remains the same. He is still as-Saqa and he still goes to fetch water, but it is the details that come in later on. And I asked myself, for example, where did Sheikh al-Mufid get these details from that Abu Makhnaf didn't have? So I follow a simple methodology. And I, as people know by now, I use equal numbers of Sunni and Shia sources because, again, I don't want people to say, oh, al-Abbas is just a Shia invention, the way they would say about Lady Fatima or Lady Zaynab. No, I want to show that he is prominent in the early Sunni historians, that nobody invented anything about him. Just a point, you mentioned Nafi bin Hilal. I felt very sorry for him because there is another man called Hilal bin Nafi who is an enemy. He was in the enemy camp. And there are some scholars who mix up the two names, but they're two distinct characters. Now, the conversation that Nafi has with his companions after al-Abbas has gone back to talk to al-Husayn, it's one of the best conversations, and I don't doubt that it is a word-for-word record of this challenge that they offer. And then when he is challenged, he describes how he came to support al-Husayn. And it's a marvelous conversation. Those, for me, those are a living part of history that I don't want to lose out on. I think they form part of the greater story. So my methodology is different from most people's, but this is how I've always worked as an historian. I always think if you want to begin with a crossword puzzle, first you find the 4 corners. Once you've got the first 4 corners, then you can begin to build the crossword. I want to find who was the first one to say that al-Abbas went to fetch water during Karbala? And once I found that, I want to see how the story develops in detail, how it changes in detail, or how it gets left out by some people completely. In fact, this story doesn't get left out by any of the scholars. They all talk about the fetching of water. It's just at different moments.
I'm happy you talked about the Sunni resources, because that's what my other question was. All the discussion is from Shia sources, or you have looked at the Sunni sources, which I'm happy you just mentioned that. That's
well, one of the big problems with Shia Islam is you have hardly any historians, early historians. There were very, very few, and those few who are regarded as so-called Shia historians, there's big debate about whether they were Shia or not to begin with. So you have to, for early Islamic history, whether we like it or not, we have to rely on people like at-Tabari and Baladhuri. But the fact is that Tabari, I think, was quite sympathetic towards al-Husayn. He may not have said so loudly, but if you read him carefully, you can see quite clearly the way he tells al-Husayn's story, that he is sympathetic to the cause. And in fact, he's accused by some other Sunnis of being a hidden Shia at Tabari. Nonetheless, I used mostly the most important maktals, earliest maktals, are all in Sunni works, the very early ones, whether it's Baladhuri or Tabari or Ibn Sa'd, because they've all taken information either from Abu Makhnaf or from one of Abu Makhnaf's disciples, one of his followers. Therefore, I use an equal mix. I don't want to be accused of being an apologist for Shia Islam, and I don't want to be accused of only using Sunni sources. So I use a healthy mix, and I did that with Lady Fatima, and I've done that ever since. And that's how I will, hopefully, in my next work, continue to work. That's my methodology.
Yeah, Dr. Al-Qudusi, before I let you to continue, we have around half an hour. So if you want to decide which question to raise or which one is more relevant, is all yours. Yes, please.
Thank you. Just I was going to do the questions. At just one point, I added that I don't think Western suspicion about Islamic documents is as warranted here. Maybe regarding the history of Syria Prophet, they have a point because they're written later on and the governments didn't like to be written or influenced. But his story of Arab, and especially Abi Makhnaf, is written closely. And he has witnesses. His great, as you explained the book, truly his great uncle and great ancestor were in Siffayn. They all know those stories. So I think here, and especially Abi Makhnaf, I objectively say, I feel he's objective. But I don't want to take this much. I want to go to the questions. One of the questions is very interesting. I think it touches you, and I give one explanation. They ask Salam, a question received. No, okay, sorry. It's the question says, how Professor Clohessy think about people connection to Imam Husayn and Abbas? The question is, which one they connect easier with? Let me just add one point. Look, because of the metaphysical dimensions of the Imam and Hazrat Masumin and Hazrat Fatima, and because these metaphysical dimensions is not as present in Hazrat Zaynab and Hazrat al-Fadl, my personal feeling, sometimes nowadays people feel more connection with Hazrat Zaynab and Hazrat al-Fadl. And that's a whole discussion we had it the last time about Hazrat Fatima and so on. So this is, I think, the question he's asking. So you elaborate on it. I would thankful. I'm not saying my point is right, but just adding to it. Thank you. You're muted, I guess, isn't it?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I think, and I might be completely wrong, and you can tell me if I am, I think that that Lady Zaynab is easier to connect with than al-Fadl. I think that her story is well known. She is a motherly, almost grandmotherly figure. She is heroic, and I think that in the contemporary Middle East, she represents countless women who've lost their loved ones and have had to remain faithful. The problem with al-Abbas is that he hides away. I know he is the moon of the Banu Hashim and the radiant moon, but he seems to me to hide always behind al-Husayn. And in fact, from a Christian point of view, he is almost, for me, what Simon Peter is for Jesus. that he hides in the background. He doesn't take a prominent position. And so al-Abbas is given all these extraordinary tasks. He is a son of Ali, but he never allows the attention to be taken from al-Husayn onto himself. Nonetheless, I agree that for many people, shall we begin by giving an example again from Catholicism? For many Catholics, it is much easier to relate to the person of Mary than to Jesus, because in Catholicism, there are the divine claims that we have about Jesus that we don't make about Mary. So Mary, in a sense, is more human and more present to us. I think that Lady Zaynab fulfills that role for many, that she has a very human face. She doesn't have the baggage, if you like, that Lady Fatima carries, the only surviving daughter of the Prophet, therefore the bloodline of the Prophet immediately, all of these gifts being ma'asuma. Lady Zaynab doesn't carry that burden of holiness, if you like, and therefore she is, for many people, more accessible. And I hope that my book made her even more accessible. I think that people, besides the water bearer story, people know very little about al-Abbas. As they come to know more about his life, they might find him more approachable. I know in many countries he's called upon, his intercession is called upon, especially for children who are sick. And I mentioned this book because he is regarded as the one who was willing to care for the children. And I know that he is greatly revered and called upon, but I suspect that outside of the carrying of water and his martyrdom, the details of his life are not as well known as the life of al-Husayn, and that therefore he is somewhat hidden. He is the moon hidden behind the sun, if you like, of al-Husayn. And I hope that this book will introduce him a little more and introduce some of his wonderful humanity.
Regarding the hiddenness, Imam Ali, we have these alt speeches, khutbahs, but all this is after Prophet. At the time of Prophet, he himself is mostly hidden behind Prophet, doesn't want in front of Prophet. That's a very good, thank you, comparison. The next question, okay. Another, do we have anything, any narration about al-Abbas and his relationship with Imam before Karbala? As you said, yeah, before Karbala, anything about before childhood or before Karbala, relation with Imam Husayn?
Not in the primary sources. In the secondary sources, yes. In the secondary sources, so by that I mean not in the early historians or in the early books of hadith. In the secondary sources, we have some commentary about the naming. Imam Ali, with the foreknowledge and the insight that only the Imam has, he names his son al-Abbas. Now there is a Quranic chapter by the same name. He frowned. It means Abasa, one who frowns. So the Quranic chapter is a slightly different form of the word. So Imam Ali, who knows that his son is going to be a heroic defender of al-Husayn and who's going to be fierce in battle, names him after a particular type of lion which does not fear its prey, a fierce lion. So that is a story that comes down to us. We pick up little details in the texts about how he lived with Imam Ali until the Imam's murder, then with his brother al-Hassan till his murder, and then finally he lived with al-Husayn and died with al-Husayn. But these are not, because the primary historians, the primary sources, they were more interested in al-Husayn and his cause than they were in the people around him, which is why we have so little about the early life of Lady Zaynab as well. We have to reconstruct. But on the day of Karbala, al-Abbas and Lady Zaynab, they come into full focus. And it's, from my point of view, it's almost as if that was the moment for which God first created them. That was it. That's when they became who they were meant to be. And I think that's very important for me. And so I don't fuss too much. I've been thinking about a new topic, and all of the topics I'm thinking about are exactly the same. I'd love to write on Hakima, but really the sources are so few. I mean, besides her involvement immediately with the birth of al-Mahdi, I thought about Sakina or Sukaina, that is the surviving daughter of al-Husayn, who later went on and got married and has quite a complex history. But the sources are so few and so difficult. So this is always going to be our problem as scholars, as historians, is that they're big chunks of information that we're just not going to find. That's fine. We've got enough to go on, but it does making the writing of biography quite difficult.
Maybe you write to write about the 8th Imam, which is so dear to the Iranians. All the Imams are dear to Iranians, but or the 6th Imam,
well, of course, while I was in Qum, I went and sat for half a day at the shrine of Lady Fatima Ma'suma, and I thought, well, I could write about Lady Fatima easily. So maybe I need to write a book about a number of the important women. Maybe we'll have to see. But I'm getting old now. It's getting harder and harder to
No,
remember
inshallah,
everything.
you will be for a long time writing, and we benefit from it. So, okay, this is the next question. Okay, oh, we have a few long questions now. Okay. Okay. Okay, this is a general question, but okay, how does Professor Clohessy distinguish martyrdom in Christianity and in Islam?
Thank you. That is very interesting. This is a very, very interesting question. So, on a primary level, martyrdom applies to those who give their life for God. That's the first level, or in the way of God. But if you're giving your life fi sabilillah, you're giving your life for God primarily. So that's the first level of martyrdom, and it applies equally to Christianity as it does to, I think, Judaism as well, and to Islam. Now, in Christianity, we call those the red martyrs, those who actually shed their blood, because we think there are other types of martyrdom where you may not shed your blood, but still pour out your life. But for the moment, let's talk about red martyrdom. So those who give their life for God, either you give your life for God because you're defending the teaching of his revelation, whether you're a Muslim defending Quran or a Christian defending the gospel, or you give your life because you're defending one of the values that God instructs us to live by, whether it's justice or fairness or any of them, any of the virtues. So you could be giving your life for a teaching, defending the truth of God. You could be giving your life for another person or another group of people to defend their rights or defend their justice. So there's a direct and an indirect martyrdom, and I think it applies in Islam as in Christianity. You're giving your life primarily for God, but indirectly, you're giving your life for one of his revelations or his teachings or a group of people or a single person who's in danger. And I think that there's little distinction between Christianity and Islam in this. I think in Islam, and I talked about this in the book, the martyrs are held in high esteem. In Islam, I mean, they are a rank above the rest. Maybe they're already the first in paradise. And that's why it's interesting that the hadith says that the martyrs are going to be envious of the position of al-Abbas on the day of judgment. So al-Abbas seems to be a step above the martyrs. I think, and I'm not absolutely convinced, but I think that as in Christianity, so too in Islam, there are other types of martyrdom. I think there are people who pour out their lives in service of God or in service of others. They forego their own rights for the rights of others. And in a sense, they are shedding or laying down their lives for others. We would call that a white martyrdom. It's not quite the physical shedding of blood, but nonetheless, you are giving your life in service of others. Once again, always for the sake of God, never primarily for the other person or cause, but always for God. So I think that between Christianity and Islam, there's little difference. Now, there is a sensitive question, and that is the question of those who die in jihad, those who deliberately end their lives. Now, that is a separate question, and it's quite a complex question, and it's far more complex than the Western media wants it to be. So the Western media reduces it to virgins in heaven. That's a lot of nonsense, and it's demeaning to human beings who are in a difficult situation of oppression and have to find some solution and have no other solution. Now, I don't want to talk about it here because, I mean, it's a complex subject. I just think that if we're going to talk about it, we need to talk about it in terms of the texts and the declarations of the scholars rather than what the media, the Western media say, because they dehumanize people and they trivialize death and trivialize death in the way of God in a horrible way. But I think on a general level, there is very little difference between Christianity and Islam in terms of the significance of martyrdom, what it entails, and how important it is.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, this is a topic maybe later on we have maybe a longer discussion or presentation from you, benefiting your knowledge. There is a question which is maybe interesting. Do you know of any modern person or martyr inspired by the altruism of al-Abbas? Or I added like that, while you writing this book, I guess you have discussions with your colleague, non-Shi'i Muslims or non-Muslims. Have any of them did you talk about your book content? Have any of them express interest? Sorry, what was your reaction to your book from non-Shi'i Muslims? Have your book already inspired some people?
Well, firstly, among my colleagues, talking over the years, there was one case that we highlighted. Now, again, in Islam, as in Christianity, there are countless martyrs. Many of them we don't know their details, we don't know their names, and we just know they were martyrs. So there was a Polish priest called Maximilian Kolbe, who was one of the many priests put into Auschwitz. And while he was there, so he was not among the Jewish population, he was among the priests who were badly treated, but not as badly. While he was there, a prisoner escaped, and the commandant of Auschwitz, and this was probably 1943, said that if he wasn't found, then somebody would be killed in his place. And they picked one of the Jewish prisoners. And the Jewish prisoner happened to be a man with a wife and children. And Maximilian Kolbe, the priest who was unmarried, stepped forward and said, "Let me swap places with him, because I have no wife and children and he does." And they agreed. So if you go now to Auschwitz, you can see the cell where he died, Maximilian Kolbe. So he gave his life for God directly, but indirectly it was he laid down his life for the sake of another human being. I think that aside from al-Abbas, whose story we now know and who is iconic, I think there are countless religious people, Christian and Muslims, who have done just that. They've laid down their lives to save others. And I wish we knew their names, but many of them will always go unknown to us, but known by God. Their names and their details are intimately known to him. So I haven't had any reaction from non-Shi'i Muslims. I've got a conference coming up next week online in South Africa, where there will be Sunni Muslims present, and I'm going to present al-Abbas as a model of selflessness and of altruism. So we will see what comes of that. I have to be honest, I'm not sure if this book has been as well received as the book on Lady Zaynab or the book on Lady Fatima. So the first two books were very well received. The third book about the dreams of Karbala was a little more technical and less well received. And perhaps the truth is that the book on al-Abbas could be a little technical at times. And so now I need to return to a popular woman among the ranks of the Shia Muslims, maybe Hakima or Nargis, again, difficult figure to write about, because these women are important and we can connect with them. Mothers and wives and daughters especially can connect with them. But I think that men and women can connect with Lady Zaynab as much as men and women can connect with al-Abbas. This for me is a very important point.
I think you are right, maybe because it's technical, but I think it finds its way. Some of these famous books in history, like a Copernicus book or other ones are, yeah, I agree. This for me was what I was excited about, because I had some of these questions. I have some background reading, and it's not that hard if any of the Shia Muslims can read it. But this time is not like a novel. It's like a really historical book. You have to look at it, and I think this is what we needed. That we needed a more critical, and I think it will do, inshallah, its service. But I agree, maybe that's take a while too. And then Nargis Khatun is also a very interesting topic, inshallah. Discuss about that.
I see that somebody has asked the question about Humayd bin Muslim Azdi. As far as I remember, he was not on al-Husayn's side. He was on Ibn Ziyad's side, but he became a narrator of events because he was an eyewitness to a number of events. Now, if I'm not mistaking him with somebody else, as I remember, Humayd might have been one of the members of Ziyad's police, chief of police, perhaps. Or am I mixing him up with another Humayd? there was certainly a Humayd who witnessed a number of things, including the attempt to kill Zayn al-Abidin and the attempt to burn the tents of the woman. But I think, if I remember, and this is chronicled in my book about the Karbala dreams, that he was a member of Ibn Ziyad's army, but he witnessed a number of things and recounted them.
This is possible because that's the other advantage Abi Makhnaf or some other ones have, that they have narrators from both sides. I know one of the slaves or the servants of the Imam Husayn survived. That's which is one of the narrators besides Imam Zayn al-Abidin. As you said, there are a couple of main narrators from the other side, and they corroborate. You know, that's the part. Both are effectively saying the same thing. You know, this side and that side, it's how. So I don't remember this name exactly, but I can second your feeling. That's the other side, and it's possible some of those narrations are narrated in Majalis. Because
so to the person who asked that question, I apologize if I've got the wrong Humayd, but if you refer to the book on the Karbala dreams, I actually wrote a paragraph about him because he seemed to be a policeman or part of the police force of Ibn Ziyad, but he is witness to a number of very important moments on the day of Ashura. And if that's the same Humayd I'm thinking of, then you're quite correct. He is a narrator, even though he's a member of the enemy. And he's very important because he witnesses crucial moments, such as the attempt to kill the Imam, the fourth Imam, Zayn al-Abidin, and the attempt to burn down the tents of the woman. He's there and he sees it happening.
Thank you. There are this is a longer question, but I think very interesting. So we have a few more questions. Professor Clohessy, what a gift you are to the chronicling of sacred history. I do believe that the modern sensibility holds a marked skepticism toward metaphysical elements of early Islamic history, particularly when it pertains to early Shia history. As a result, the modern chronicle tends to shy away from mentioning of the metaphysical, if only to be taken seriously by our time and age. But you marry the two, the secular and the sacred, with great compassion. So maybe it's a compliment, and I agree with her, because even myself, I'm more personally inclined to be a little bit to the secular or modern, but I think some person like you, which holds and outside the tradition, hold the line, is very appreciated. Do you have any comments about this point, or do you want to add anything to it, Professor Clohessy? Or I can go to the next question.
That's very kind. I would hope that eventually, as I did 3 or 4 years ago, if anyone's got any ideas for my next book, this would be very helpful, because I am struggling to find, my field of interest is Karbala and the years before and immediately after Karbala. And so the years after Karbala are a little more hidden. So what happened, for example, to Sukaina or Sakina, and Lady Zaynab, we know, lived for at least a year after Karbala. But then even the later history, so for example, Narjis is a crucial figure because she's a Christian who is also the mother of the 12th Imam. There's a hadith that says she's descended from Simon Peter. I have some doubts about that, some issues, but I'm beginning to look at the sources. So that would be very interesting. Hakima, of course, is equally important, tied up with Narjis and the Imam. So I need to think a little bit about. I'm a believer. I believe in God. He is really the center of everything for me as a priest, and therefore I would never ever want to ignore sacred history, because that would be to suggest that God is not present anymore, that he is no interest in humanity. But he reveals, the very reason that God has given us revelation is because he is interested in humanity and wishes to enter into a sort of a dialogue with us. The dialogue being that we respond in submission, whether you want to call it faith or call it Islam. That response is part of our ongoing dialogue with a God who spoke first. And so to simply push him from history, for me, is illogical and goes against everything that I have ever believed or thought. So I'm happy to be able to marry the two, sacred and secular, and run along these two parallel lines.
Yeah, the same question, and Mrs. Naila Mughul added, additionally, an honest retelling of the past cannot be entirely delinked from the emotional metaphysics if it is to be sacred history, but modernity requires an apology alongside. Yeah, she's right. I mean, kind of in the line. And then also the next question in Farsi is in the line you mentioned. One other character in the story of Karbala, which actually these days are the anniversary of the time of her passing away, is the Ruqayya, the young daughter of Imam Husayn. Mrs. Atari is asking that, I mean, saying Farsi and then thanking you for all the talk. He says, and she has, as Professor Clohessy had thought about or wrote about Hazrate Ruqayya, but then what is the historicity of her? Because she adds that we know, at least the story says, Hazrate Ruqayya passed away in Sham, in Syria, but the only place there is a report of it, it seems in the book Kamil by, I guess, Kamil Bahai. So have you discussed, have you written, have you thought about this young daughter of Imam Husayn, Ruqayya, which passed away, you know, very tragically, at least it's alleged or said, passed away tragically in captivity in Sham or something like that?
So believe it or not, I was thinking about her yesterday. Yeah. Yesterday, I was thinking about Ruqayya. The reason being is that in some Islamic communities, I might be wrong again, but I think possibly in Pakistan, Ruqayya and Sakina are combined into the same person by some people. They think it's the same person. I don't think it was the same person at all. You have Ruqayya, who dies as a young child in a prison, I think in Sham. I think she died while still in prison. But Sukaina or Sakina, and it's hard to know which one because I generally go with Sukaina, but it could be Sakina.
Yeah.
She got married. We know this. We have the text, the early text, and she got married a number of times. So she's not the same as Ruqayya, who died in the prison cell. It's always been an issue. The children of al-Husayn, the children of Lady Zaynab, even the children of al-Abbas, to get a definitive list, because if you read Al-Mufid, he says one thing, and if you read somebody else, they say something completely different. I am convinced, firstly, that Lady Zaynab was different from Kulthum as an individual personality in history. They were not, as some people say, the same person. I'm talking about Lady Zaynab, the daughter of Ali and Fatima, because they also had a daughter called Kulthum. And some people say Kulthum was the laqab or the whatever, I think laqab of Lady Zaynab. No, I think they were two distinct people. I think Ruqayya, who died very young in prison, was a distinct human being, as opposed to a Sukaina, who grew up a survivor of Karbala. She was present. She challenged Ibn Ziyad on one occasion. She recounts a dream that she had to him and embarrasses him. She grew up. She got married a number of times. And I'm looking at her history. And that's why I was thinking yesterday of Ruqayya, because I spoke to a Shia yesterday. He said, oh, where I come from, they're the same person. And I said, no, I think they can't be the same person. So thank you for whoever brought that up, because it is very interesting. And I hope perhaps to be able to show, if I speak about Sukaina, if I write about her, I will not neglect to speak about Ruqayya. That I assure you. So,
thank you. And then, you know, even in Palestine, you see very young children, people dying, suffering. And then when I see those suffering, I identify me with Hazrat Ruqayya. You know how the hardship these young children have to go through this. I mean, that's another, we're thankful for your writing. And then one other, I don't have any question, but one other thing, because we are also near end of time. But regarding Nargis Khatun, you know, there are some interesting research. I can send you the articles, they were ever published it. Some of the two scholars, young scholar, independent scholars, try to identify any traces of her or person like her in Byzantine sources. So, and they were able to find, because there is the issue of earthquake, whether there was any war between Muslim and Byzantine army that period. There was a known lady with that characteristic, and they were successful. They've published 4 or 5 articles, and although they put the thing, because it's academic journals, Jordanian and Byzantine study, they put it reverse. They put it Arabic sources, which is the one of the books of Sheikh Saduq, information about the Byzantine princess. And one thing because you just mentioned it, because this is dear for me, and actually in the trip in Iran the last week, 2 weeks ago, I saw both of the authors, and I can say, look, that people think Nargis Khatun is the descendant of Simon Peter. But I believe, and if one we can discuss, I believe she may be descended Simon, brother of Jesus. We know in Bible, New Testament, talk about Mary have other children. I mean, okay, I know Catholic, Protestant, different view, whether they're actual children of Mary. Okay, maybe not, but maybe children from Joseph, of the brother of Joseph. So they could be brother-in-law of Jesus or the cousin of Jesus. And then one of them was Simon. What the first one was Jacob or Yaqub or James, the English James. And then he was the leader of the church the first 30 years, besides Paul, and Paul was outside. And then after him, the leadership of the church, it seems, goes to this brother, Simon. So it's not Simon the Peter, Simon the Rock, Simon the brother of Jesus. This make it similar to the Islamic story, and then some other Catholic scholar like Klaus von Stosch and even James Tabor. James Tabor is academic scholar in the United States. They mentioned that maybe there is an issue similar to family of the Jesus and other companions like we have in Shia Sunni Islam. And then we know they record the lineage, because they're Davidic lineage, but also the people kept the record of being descended. And this brother of Jesus, it is narrated, was martyred in 110 AD because of the Roman authorities were worried of his Davidic lineage and the possibility of the uprising. So what I'm saying, you're working on this Narjis Khatun and the continuation of the work of other people, and just with this correction, because when these guys working, I asked them, do you know anybody take lineage from Simon Peter? So we don't have an Islamic tradition. People keep track lineage Abdurrahman of, But in the Christian tradition and the Davidic lineage and Jesus tradition, I'm sorry, this is scholarly, but I will send it to you. But I was thinking of this topic could be very interesting. I mean, I just choose the time and then.
So I would be exceptionally grateful to read these articles. The trouble is that if you read the text in Sheikh Saduq in Ibn Babawayh, he uses the Arabic word Qaisar, which means Caesar. And he's talking about a Byzantine Caesar, not a Roman, Western Roman. The trouble is that in Byzantium, lots of people were called Caesar, not just the emperor. And so to trace her is going to be, so I looked at all of the Byzantine emperors and the records of their children and couldn't find one among them who matched her. But that's just the beginning of research for me. I only just begun. So I'd be really interested, because if it's true, it's a greatly important factor. And therefore, I'd be grateful to read any articles. If they're in Arabic, fine. If they're in Farsi, then I would struggle. But
actually, they're English. And then interestingly, the English, and then one of them won the Jordanian Royal Academy Award of the articles.
I would be grateful to read them.
Yeah, and then actually they were successful exactly in this. Look, the part which I emphasize, Simon Peter, Simon, the brother of Jesus, as my suggestion to them, because I said, did you find any lineage? But this part they were successful, and interestingly, and the articles are purely academic. As you are right, it's not the Caesar, as one of the chief. I don't know, generals or commanders. I will send you from Dr. Musallai. I will send it via that to you after this talk, inshallah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So Dr. Musallai, is there any other question or any other thing?
No,
any audience?
We're at the end of the event. At least if you want to add something, Dr. Clohessy, please. Do you want to?
No, I really, honestly, I recommend to all the believers, we know the story of Karbala, read the Professor Clohessy book with patience and detail. It will be rewarding. It's not a narrative, easy story straight. It's an academic, but rewarding, give you depth and give you more certainty. And I think we need more, a healthy dose of source criticism is needed with respect, which his work has it. So I really, it was different. When I started, then soon I noticed this is a little bit different. And then the reason is that because we have more historical sources. And that's my recommendation. I hope this encourages people after this interview want to pick up the book and reading it. And I'm very thankful for he writing these books and for the time he offered us. And also thank you, Dr. Musalleh, always behind the scenes, without want to be seen, you all the spirit behind all this good work. Thank you.
But I mean, thank you so much, Dr. Clohessy. You did it wonderful. Professor Clohessy, do you have anything to add? Or
no, just to thank you again. I'm always honored to be invited to speak about these things. I always find myself surprised that anybody would be really interested to hear me. So it's always a great joy to take part in this session. And for me, these sessions always help to build good relations between people and between people of faith. And for me, that's always a good thing. So I'm grateful in a world where so many people are fighting and pulling apart that we're able to have these marvelous discussions and agree on so much.
Yeah, it was really wonderful having you. As I mentioned in the beginning, this lecture or this book review presented as part of the MIT Shia group. While we are a Shia group, I think one of our obligations is to be open to all the ideas and opinions, and then have an open dialogue. Then all of us can learn. That's really what we try to stay on. Thank you so much again, everyone, for joining the session. And I know it is a Sunday, busy for all of us, especially Professor Clohessy, given it is a Sunday. But once again, we're thankful for you and then to accepting our invitation, and we look forward to having you more in our future events.
Many thanks.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.